starting out with a just really brief, some of you have been through this drill before, but that I, just a really concise, to the point, what are your issues and what you care about? Not the canned, I want to serve stump speech, okay? Because we assume you want to serve, or you want to go through all this trauma.
Exactly.
Trauma is the right word? So we'll run down the order. Yeah, I think you guys are in this order because I think I grabbed my notes from one of the candidate order lists, and so we'll mix it up later. But we'll start with you, Marvin, and just if you could just what are your issues and why are you running? To the policy points as opposed to the motherhood and apple pie stuff. Okay.
Well, I've been on the council for 4 years. I've learned a lot. I'm really concerned that we're at a threshold point with respect to our budget. We are expecting a $23 million structural deficit by the year 2023, primarily driven by employee pensions and OPEB, other post-employee benefits, more specifically in the form of retiree medical coverage. And so that's the number one issue for me as we move forward in the next 4 years.
Rocky. And by the way, I appreciate the short to the point, 1 minute concise. Hint, folks.
My name is Rocky Fernandez, and I am born and raised here in Hayward. And I'm concerned that Hayward isn't exactly meeting its potential. We have thousands of young people who come in every day. They get educated, and then they drive right back out. And I really think that the future of the economy is going to be based on making sure we have more of an entrepreneurial spirit, where we take these young people who are getting educated, give them good places to live in transit-oriented housing, because that's primarily where they want to live, and then give them the tools and the resources and the gathering spaces in which they can meet, talk through their ideas, kind of grow these jobs of the future and careers of the future. And I think we have great potential to do that, and we're not taking advantage of that. I think it's going to help us grow our economy and really solve some of the budget challenges we've had. And we're going to have to use a lot more data in the way that we plan things. I have some experience with that at AC Transit, where we closed a large budget deficit, $56 million, back in the times when every government was struggling. And we made some tough challenges, but we also used some data-driven approaches to how we deployed our bus service. I want to bring that approach to Hayward so that we can grow our economy and have a better Hayward for everybody.
Sure. For me, it's about traffic, not just getting through Hayward smoothly and efficiently, but making sure that Hayward is an inviting place to stop and shop, to play, that it's easy to get to schools, to work, etc. There's a lot of work, not only in the downtown, of course that's where it'd start, but also corridors like Hesperian Boulevard are just a traffic jam, and we haven't really addressed that in a concrete way. It's also about jobs. Number one response to community violence, to homelessness, to growing our economy is employment. So we need to leverage the expertise not only on the Hill but in our industrial section to bring more employers into the community, really streamline our permitting process, etc. And lastly, that we're including people in the decisions that affect their lives. There's more to say about that, but I'll keep it short.
What do you mean by that?
So decisions...
Briefly,
yeah. I'm thinking of the short version of that. The short version of that looks like making sure that when we're talking about contract decisions or policy decisions, even employment, investment, business decisions, that the people that are going to be affected by that decision are in the room, not just here's what the city is proposing, what do you think, but at the beginning of that conversation in a productive way, so that what comes forward is something everybody can have ownership in and really move us forward.
Negotiations.
Not only that, but yes, that's part of it.
Rodney?
Yes. For me, it's about economic development. And one thing that I'm finding as I go walk precincts and knock on doors, the main thing that I hear from people is the complaints about the loop. About the mini loop.
Okay, right.
Yeah. And I mean, when we look at that, I think what the city needs to do and hasn't been done yet is we need to go to the downtown businesses and really quantify what the impact has been that the mini loop has had on those various businesses. I think that will give us a better opportunity to see how best to move forward, how we can, if it's feasible to reverse the decisions that were made. So that's one. The other one is public safety. And when we look at public safety, I think one of the things we have not done, we really only looked at one end of the spectrum. Funding police, make sure we have enough police, which is something we need to do. But we also need to look at the other end. We need to make sure there's opportunities for our young people, whether they're leisure opportunities or whether they're growth potential opportunities. But we need to make sure that, things such as job development opportunities or putting youth-oriented business in the transportation areas. So if we do those things, it'll really benefit us on the back end when it comes to public safety. So those would be my main issues.
Julie?
Yes, my platform is absolutely economic development. I'm a business person. I've opened a couple of businesses here in Hayward. I've worked with the city in opening those businesses, and I think that there's a lot of potential here in the city, in the industrial area and in the downtown, all over, that needs to be tapped. I look at what's in planning right now. The last 8 years have not really focused much on bringing new businesses into the city of Hayward. There's not much going to happen until we get that pipeline back to robust what it needs to be, which we need to attract businesses here to the city and to the industrial area. We see the cities around us have just blown past us with respect to economic development, and I want to focus on that. And if we have something we'd like to do, we need to go out and figure out how to get it done. And I know how to do that. I've had experience doing that. And I would like to, again, with the permit process in the city of Hayward, encourage the city to streamline that process and make it more inviting for businesses to come in.
Phil?
I'm Phillip Gallegos. I believe we need to work on improving our public schools scores to attract people who take pride in education, and especially the education for their children. I feel that Hayward is losing a lot of families due to the low scores that our schools have. I hear it all the time that people want to move to other cities that have better scores. Parents want to take their children to private schools. I think we need to invest in programs to outreach the parents in our communities to have a better outlook on their children's future in terms of getting into colleges. A program for lending of technology so that parents and students can keep up, and also safety for families and seniors, and to continue the arts, in performing arts, visual arts, that has been enhancing the quality of life in Hayward, and also safety, both to reduce crimes, and also safety in our environment when it comes to air quality and the quality of our resources that we live with every day. And those are my main concerns. Thank you.
Okay. Let's work the other way. Starting with you, Philip. Give me your assessment of the state of city finances right now.
The state of city finances are, to me, it seems obvious that there's some kind of trouble where if the employees' pay has to be cut. I know that there was some communication in terms of their far future of why we're trying to put money aside for their futures, but we probably shouldn't have gotten to that point where we needed to go outside of the norm. We should always be a little bit ahead in terms of a cushion, a little bit of an emergency fund, to try to prevent anything that takes away from employees unexpectedly. Also, to take care of the needs that we have on basic needs as it's street repairs, keeping our police force where they should be in terms of numbers, and also fire and other services.
Have you looked at the city's finances?
I've looked at. To me, I don't understand what every number means, but just in general, I've talked to the Police Officers Association, and they say that they feel that they're under numbers. I've heard city employees' complaints about how the cuts on their pay is unfair, and that it has been a burden on their life and in terms of their personal finances. So I feel like we shouldn't be putting a burden on employees' personal finances if it's preventable. And I think that with long-term planning, that there should be a better way to reduce those burdens.
Julie?
You know, the city's been holding its own. We know that the state's been taking money here and there and everywhere they can find it from cities. So I know with the utilities tax that went into effect a number of years ago, that helped balance the budget for the city of Hayward. I don't know what we would have done without utility tax, but I believe they've done a good job in holding the line and creating a balanced budget. I know Measure C is going to be important coming up this June to help the city cover some short-term operating expenses in addition to the library.
Measure C will be, Measure
The
C
sales tax increase.
will be a help in what?
And, oh, no, I forgot what I said.
Yeah.
That gap, it's going to go somewhat to operating expenses and in addition to a new library. But I think it's necessary for the city to have that pass, and I think they can do it. But in the long term, I think economic development and at a broader financial base here in the city is going to help fund operating expenses as it should.
Rodney?
The city has been holding its own, but we're still in a very difficult position. Some of this is due to the state taking a lot of money from the city. Some of it is due to a very poor recession in recent years. But I mean, if you look at all of our benefit liabilities taken together, we're looking at the 930 some odd million in total liabilities, and more than 40%
I'm
of
sorry,
it is
we're looking at
unfunded.
how much?
930 million.
Mm-hmm.
And more than 40% of that is unfunded. And the city is definitely going to have to make a goal to lower that number. We shouldn't be at more than 25%. And we have to make a solid goal to lower that amount of unfunded liability. The majority of that is obviously CalPERS. And if we look at ways to put more money into the unfunded portion of CalPERS, I think would be a good thing. Now, where the money comes from, we're going to have to be some discussions on where our priorities are and where we can afford to move the money from, but that has to be higher on the priority list.
Sarah?
Yeah, we've been
And by the way, apologies if I'm not looking at it. I'm just madly trying to take notes.
It's all good.
And I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not ignoring you.
No, clearly not.
Okay, go ahead.
So the state of the city finances. In general, we've done a good job over the last few years. I worked on the Measure A campaign, which was the users utility tax, because at that time we knew that we couldn't get to where we needed to go without it. And I think that really has kept us solvent. And there's been a lot of internal restructuring, which was done with the various workers, et cetera. And I think that was really important and great. There were some great ideas about moving funds, but some of that stuff is one time. Now we really need to address the structural issues, the structural deficits. We need to make sure that we are starting to fund now for repairs and replacements of equipment, facilities, buildings, et cetera, now into the future. I think that's why we're looking at a Measure C, because we don't at the moment have the money to replace the police station, the library, which are really antiquated for the level of service that our city provides. But in general, I'm not in favor of more and more going back to the taxpayers again and again and again. I think we need to work with our school district to improve our test scores. We need to work with our business community and industry throughout the region to attract employers, to raise our revenue base so that we are stable and we don't have to keep doing these short-term measures.
Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
I
Want to make sure you have
if,
time.
if it's the damnest thing. If my fingers screw up with one typo or something, I try and fix that. It just throws me for seconds. My apologies. Okay, Rocky, go for it.
I think the city is starting to see an uptick and starting to see some of the short-term issues settle that we've had recently. I actually walked through the budget with the city manager and so forth, and You look at some of those long-term costs.
So you're starting to see some of the short-term issues. I'm sorry.
Some of the short-term issues are getting better in terms of, you have more property tax, sales tax coming in. The top two contributors to our general fund are starting to come back up, and that's a good thing, but it's not something you want to bank on that's going to continue. You're going to have to take good effort to make sure that progress continues. I think recently, I experienced big budget challenges at AC Transit, like I said earlier. And we had to take made some tough choices.
Yeah, but right now, I'm not asking for the solutions yet. What I'm asking for is the assessment of the situation. We'll get to the solutions.
Okay. No. Okay. I think there are a lot of long-term challenges coming up. Clearly, when you say that the long-term pension costs are only 6% funded, you realize, you need to make sure you're making investments into that.
Long-term pension costs are only 6% funded. Okay.
No, 60.
60. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. And so you're gonna have to make sure you are working towards finding solutions to that, because that's going to start to cut into city services that we don't want to cut. I think we are unfortunately passing on a lot of good economic development opportunities. I've talked to business owners who want to open businesses downtown, taking them a couple of weeks to even get a response at a city hall, when it should take a couple of days to someone that's willing to get something going there. I think we also we've recently passed on some housing projects that I think would have brought a more incumbent population to the downtown area, would have brought more shoppers there, and would have brought in a lot of economic development dollars.
So now you're talking a little bit more solutions. We'll come to that in a second.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay,
But I think what I'll say, we're passing up on good opportunities to grow our budget, and I think that's something we need to be serious about.
Marvin.
Dan, could you repeat the question
Yeah,
again?
I want your assessment of the city budget, the city finances.
The city finances are not in good shape, primarily driven by the dissolution of redevelopment. Our structural deficit, as has been mentioned, is something we need to deal with. I've been in closed sessions where we've had a number of actuarial analysis. And some of those analyses will show modest revenue projections, middle of the road, and then doomsday projections. And in every scenario, including the Beacon report, which was presented by one of the unions, Local 21, in every case, in the 10-year forecast, there is a significant structural deficit. Again, as I mentioned in my opening comments, primarily driven by two things: employee pensions, medical costs, and OPEB, other post-employee retirement benefits. And so there has to be a way to address this. 80% of the budget's in salaries and fringes. Now, Rocky brings up this point that he sees things improving with some of the property tax revenue. I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding that most people have, in that we're dealing not just with the current fiscal year deficit. The $4.8 million that came in over budget in property tax is about 30% of total revenues, was one-time only property transfer tax for some sell-offs of parcels, and an improvement in overall property, in the real estate market. That addresses the fiscal year. If I had to deal with just closing the budget gap on the fiscal year, it'd be easy. I could do it with reserves. Of course, I couldn't do it every single year, but that's not the issue. And I think that's where the complexity of this budgeting is confused by the unions, with this statement that things are getting better, but we're not benefiting from it. It is not what happens this year, it's what's happening in the 10-year forecast, and we need to address that in a serious way.
Real quickly, because this has come up here. Roughly, folks, how well funded? And let's start with you, Sarah. How well funded are the retirement benefits for the city right now?
I'm not sure if I understand.
The
I mean,
retirement benefits for
right.
the city.
So the number that's
CalPERS and OPEB. How
Right.
well funded are they?
right. My understanding is that they're, holding their own at the moment, but
I'm sorry, what?
that they're holding their own at the moment. Things are pretty balanced, but the anticipation is that there could be millions of dollars in increasing costs, and that there will be millions of dollars in increasing costs the further and further you go out, because of course we've done things like make retirement ages at 50 or 55. So with the lifespan, you can do that math. So,
Okay. Rocky?
From my understanding from the revision of the budget that came out earlier this year, we're at about 60% and funded long term. I think you look at the 10-year projections, and yes, the cost for those things do continue to go up. So it's going to continue to present a challenge for us to figure out how to close that gap. Hopefully, as more revenues come in and make those choices.
Okay. Rodney?
CalPERS and OPEB, I don't think are well funded. The 60% is not high enough. It's not where we need to be. The city needs to set a firm goal to get ourselves up more than 75 to 80% range. It seems like workman's comp is fine at the moment. It seems like early leave payouts are being addressed, which I'm glad to see.
I was really concerned about
but the other
PERS
two
and
are going to
OPEB.
be the biggest challenges, I believe, for the city of
Okay.
Hayward.
Okay. Julie?
I have to concur that 60% or thereabouts is funded, and we need to address that.
Philip?
Would you repeat the question?
How well funded are the retiree health plans in the city?
Okay, so if we're at 60%, I probably wouldn't want it to go any higher than 70, mainly because as a city employee, and if many of the city employees are also Hayward residents, they also have to be concerned about how the city operates, and the give and take is a better city for these employees, and as many employees do, we put in a certain percent into our retirement and into our benefits.
Do you understand what the 60 and 70% numbers mean?
60% is how much they contribute for their
No,
retirement.
that's not what we're talking about. Okay.
Okay.
Marvin?
Not well funded at all. We're not even making our ARC contribution, the minimum required to pay off the OPEB. We don't even have an OPEB trust fund, with the exception of the firefighting department, who is now contributing to the OPEB fund. We're on track to get some of the other employees to agree to that, but we have not met with much success. I think the firefighters are a good example of where we would like to be. They're making the full 9% contribution for the employee share, and 6% of the 9% for the employer share, plus an OPEB contribution.
I'm sorry, say that again. Firefighters are what?
Firefighters have 18% requirement, 9%,
I'm sorry, so firefighters 9%
9% employee, that's the employee
employee
share.
share, right?
9% is the employer share.
Firefighters. They're doing a pickup of the employer share.
Yeah, 6%. So the full employee share is being paid by them, 9%,
Yeah.
and 6% of the employer share is being picked up.
Well, your rates are a lot more than a total of 18%.
Right. The check that we write to CalPERS is going to be a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, so but what you're saying is that they're paying 9% of the they're paying their full 8 and 9, plus they're doing a reverse pickup of 6.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the track we want to get on, and hopefully we can make employees be responsible for
Are
more
any of
than
the others doing more than their employee share?
No, as far as I know, and even SEIU just picked up the 8% employee share last year.
Okay.
So, by the way, City Council's been paying it for 20 years.
The answer to the question is your funded ratios are about 63, 64% for CalPERS, and it's goose eggs for OPEB. So you average it, and it's 59%. And you've got an unfunded liability of $372 million, which is equal to about 5 years of payroll. Okay, so whoever, if you does win, I hope you guys commit those numbers to memory. So, then you guys went to, with SEIU, you went to mediation, correct?
We went through the process for 10 months.
Right. You went to mediation. You had one
Fact finding.
fact finder. You had one fact finder, Catherine Thompson, who wrote a fact finding report. Everyone familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Rocky, give me your assessment of that fact finding report.
I think it's very long, 81 pages or so. But I think it put out there that the city had said that the city had the ability to pay more now, but didn't address the long-term challenges that the city is going to be facing budget-wise. I think the one thing that kind of is left out of that is there's some assumptions there on where our budget's going, and I maybe am overly optimistic, but I want to be optimistic that we're going to be able to grow our revenues and be able to bring in more money so that we actually can, that we don't have to choose between paying our workers well and being able to balance our budget. And I think if we do take really aggressive economic development stances and policies, that we can hopefully do all those things.
You think the city can grow out of this?
I hope so. I think we have the potential to, absolutely. But I think a lot of these things are driven by factors that are out of our hands when it comes to the cost of health care and so forth. I hope that, it's beyond our power as a city council to do these things, but hopefully we start to get really a handle on the cost of health care, retirement costs and so forth, and make sure that more people have good long-term plans for their own fiscal houses so that we can make sure we do all these things.
Rodney, what's your take on this fact finder's report?
I believe the fact finding report took issue with the city making a 10-year projection, and I'm sorry, I think the city has to make a 10-year projection. It may not be completely accurate. There's only so much good information you're going to get, but it's going to help us make some decisions. Now, with that being said, I think the city made a mistake by throwing the whole fact finding report out. I don't think we could do that. I think it was, if I'd been given a little bit of time, there may have been some opportunity for the city to come to some sort of resolution.
What do you mean, made a mistake by throwing the whole?
Because from what I saw, the city disregarded the fact-finding report as a whole and moved forward with the imposition. So I was.
What would you have done?
I would have given it more time. I'm not sure I don't know if any discussions were had in those 4 days. So I think if there had been more time, and maybe if we changed both sides, have changed representation at the bargaining table, there might have been opportunity for resolution to be had.
And what was the cost of the city during that time?
During that 4 days, you mean?
No, if they had delayed.
Oh, well, it would depend on how long the delay would last.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying delay for months, but that would be my answer.
Okay, Sarah, your take on the fact finder's report?
I appreciated that there were the proposal at the end of, we do this much, nothing this year, and then that there could be revenue sharing in the future if all of the budget obligations were met. I think that type of structure could have met both sides in the discussion, and it really didn't seem to have been considered at all. I understand the urgency of getting to a resolution, but I think that's a proposal hopefully could have been brought forward sooner, but once it was on the table, that it needed to be considered more thoroughly, because I think that could have gotten us to consensus.
Julie?
The mediation report,
The fact finder, no.
The fact finder report did state that the city probably short-term could afford more than it had agreed to give the employees, but it did not address the long-term problems that may arise. Again, there was some urgency to the negotiation process to come to resolution, but I do think it was premature to impose the contract and put that in. I think that has really created an atmosphere in the city and with the employees that's going to take years to repair. And given that, I don't think that the imposition was the right thing to do and pretty much poisoned the well going forward. So it's going to be a long, long time to regain the confidence and trust between the city and its employees.
Phil?
I don't really have a great opinion on the fact finder report. I've read it and used it towards answering questions for my CAPA, but I honestly can't say that I recall enough to give an answer on that question.
Okay. So Marvin, you're sort of the defender of what they did do.
I am.
Yeah.
I read the entire fact finder report and the assistant city manager's rebuttal in total to the fact finding report. Fact finders' jobs are basically to split the baby in any kind of negotiation. That is almost impossible to do in today's modern public employee environment. SEIU expected to come out of this with some kind of financial gain. That is not possible in a concessionary environment where we've had 7 bargain units out of the 9 agreed to take the 17% cut over a 3-year period. You know, there was talk about how much, you mentioned, Dan, about what was the cost. Over this 10-month period of negotiation with SEIU, the city lost $800,000. And that was a strategy that was conducted by SEIU because they knowingly knew they would be locked in the current contract and not lose any of their wages. So this idea of we need to get back to the table, we need to start talking. Getting to the table is not the issue. It's what happens when we get to the table. And SEIU is locked in a regional strategy that is attempting to show current membership and prospective members of SEIU that they're able to deliver an MOU that has a financial improvement over the previous year's contract. That is absolutely not possible in today's modern public budget environment. By the way, I think she's going to get a lot more jobs with SEIU.
One of the things that, frankly, I wasn't fully aware of until I read Rebecca's story the other day was the council salaries. Marvin, starting with you, what do you think? What's the justification for the council salaries at the levels they're at?
So you're talking in light of the Berkeley salary, we're being the second highest?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's really an argument that these, you know, most city councils are not paid anywhere on that kind of scale.
Yeah, I wasn't around when it was proposed. It's about $2,000 a month,
Yeah.
which is reasonable, I think, because we do put in 20 to 30 hours a week on the average. I put in a little bit more because I'm on a number of daytime commissions. But, you know, since I've been on the council, every year I've incurred a loss, particularly over these last years when we had to meet the concession requirements that we were imposing on the bargaining units.
A loss from what?
I pay more for my medical coverage now
Okay.
than I
So in
do.
other words, the net has gone down.
It's gone way down,
Okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah, since when I started.
okay.
You know, if people wanna discuss that, lowering it, I'm open to that, but I do think to attract good city council members, particularly people who are still in the workforce, you're gonna have to make it worth their while. and we're second really only to Berkeley.
Rocky?
Can I,
Yeah, sure.
one last one. There's also some misinformation that is being thrown out on bulletin boards about how council members have taken increases in wages. Absolutely false. How they've never paid for their pensions. Absolutely false. Been paying for it for 20 years. And I really think it goes beyond being disingenuous, and I'd like to see that stopped.
Rocky?
Well, I think I think whenever you do serve in office, and I've got to do that before.
I'm sorry, what?
Whenever you serve in office, you sacrifice quite a bit of your time, a lot of your time, to not just doing the meetings, but the preparation for meetings, the community events that you go to, the liaisonships, and so forth. And it's sometimes challenging on your personal career because you have to ask your employer for 10 to 20 hours a week off to do the job. And I think it's important that we remember that the people that do put themselves up for public office will have those challenges, and it's a trade-off. But I think it's important to compensate members of the community who do step up to run for office. As for the level that it's at now, yeah, maybe because we are in a situation where we're asking concessions, that we make sure we step up as well, and I think that's important to do, and that we're always taking the lead on doing that before we're asking our workers to do the same thing. But I think it is important for the community to understand how much time this does take for a person who wants to serve to do that, because it is often precluding them from maybe taking other full-time jobs and so forth. You have to really make good adjustments in your life to do that.
Just to be sure we're talking about the same thing, so my understanding is that the salary is approximately $25,000 a year
That's my understanding. too.
for the council and
Mhm.
$40,000 for the mayor.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It's just under 40,000.
Okay.
It's a little
So just-
flyer set when we filed.
I just want to make sure I was talking about the same numbers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're a city of 140, 150,000, depending on how it's counted. In order to have the attention for any job, you have to pay people. That's how it works. So I don't think that's an unrealistic. Essentially, it's a part-time job expectation for council. It's a full-time job expectation for mayor. Certainly, as a council member, I plan to work full-time for that wage, and that's so. Do we need to be responsible managers, which means cutting our salary first, which I've always done when I've worked? Absolutely. Is it unrealistic to pay our city council at a wage that should make sure that they attend to us? Absolutely. And that we demand that as a city. We're paying you, therefore we expect to see you at these things. We expect you to participate in process, etc.
Brian?
I have to say I didn't see the article that you're referring to that talks about Berkeley, but when I looked at the income for city council members, I have never seen an issue, never had an issue with it. If we are completely out of line with neighboring cities and other cities of similar size, that would be interesting. I haven't come across that, but if that's the case, it's something that should be looked at. Now, with that being said, I would have to agree with Marvin when it talks about the billboards and went up, and they've talked about city council members giving themselves raises and whatnot. And after I saw that, I did a little research, and from what I found, council hasn't had a raise since 2004. So I was a little bothered with the billboards, but I do think that Hayward definitely should keep itself in line with cities of similar size and how much we pay our elected officials.
Julie?
Just seeing the people that are running for council, to me, it's not about the money. I don't think that I would serve, and I don't think anybody here at the table is serving to make $2,000 a year. So that being on the table, whether it would be in our benefit to take a reduction, maybe, but the money is not about, it's not about the money. But I do think it's important to pay. It attracts people to run for council. This is very time consuming and prevents people from doing other things in their lives. So I think the amount of money is inconsequential, but we just do it to serve, and whether or not we get paid, it wouldn't matter, I'd still be running.
Go on.
Okay. I mean, I'd like to, echo everything that everyone said. You know, you do it not for the money; it's for the your input to make Hayward a better place. And also, it's who would want to be in the shoes of someone making under 2,500 on some of the decisions, especially the ones lately that have angered people, and these decisions can be very stressful. So, it's something that you want to do, and I mean, just campaigning alone, the statements $2,700 and your cards and your papers and your websites and everything alone is going to be about a quarter of that income alone. So the average person's already spending that. So it's definitely not about the money. It's about trying to make a difference.
So we've heard varying degrees of discussion about the projected shortfalls and the importance of them in the city going forward. We've heard about the fact finder report and what could be done short term versus long term and so forth. Just to wrap this up, and let me start with you, Philip, and we'll work across. What is the path forward, if you will? With the exception of Marvin, I don't think anybody here at the table agrees with the imposition. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. If not the imposition, what is the solution, short term and long term?
Without the imposition, could you clarify that?
Without the contract imposition, what is the what alternatives and what is the long term? You know, not only the imposition, but what is the long term way out of this structural deficit the city faces?
Okay.
Maybe that's a better way to put the question. What is the long term way out of the structural deficit?
Okay. So the long-term way out, we need to start focusing on saving revenue, trying to create new revenue, and putting the money aside for basically the bills we have to pay, to plan ahead so that we have a strategy to pay off the debt that we have, or not particular debts, but kind of to strengthen us to get us to the point where we won't be in the situation. And to get the new revenue, there's the ideas of housing, but I think bringing in new businesses is something we need to do, not just for the revenue alone, but to improve our downtown environment and to improve locations throughout Hayward that also need some focus.
So what I'm hearing from you is, and a structural shortfall has a revenue and an expenditure side.
Yes.
And what you're saying is solve it on the revenue side.
Well, the revenue and the spending side.
Okay,
both
what
at
would
this-
you give up on the spending side?
We would look at things. Some people say that the street cleaning isn't effective because nobody moves their cars. So maybe for a while we cut it down to one time a month, and especially we're concerned about water usage. Maybe we start trying to decrease how much water the city spends, use gray water, try to use technology to reduce paper waste and to reduce other forms of waste that the city may be putting out. it would also have a nice green aspect to that, and also financial.
Okay. Julie?
It's going to take quite a few different techniques and strategies to get through this going forward. First thing and foremost is to regain the trust and the respect that was lost through the imposition of the contract. So that is going to take a while to get over that. I think all the parties are going to come back to the table with kind of some scars. So to get through that, but I think respectful negotiation and trust and build that over a number of years, that's going to have to happen first. I think what the fire department has done, and they're a great example of negotiating and giving up a bit and wait and see. Economics is going to play a part. Economic development will play a part. Increasing the tax base is going to play a part. It's going to be a process, but I don't think it's insurmountable. I do think that Hayward is not fully utilizing what it has to offer in the way of its location, its assets, its universities. There's so much here in Hayward that needs to be tapped. I have great hopes for the future of Hayward, including economic development, and I think that will address the short term and the long term.
So I'm hearing through negotiations mainly. I'm a little unclear. You know,
Both.
I heard a lot of generalities in there, but I didn't hear specific. What gives? Are you saying further cuts, city employee cuts? Are you saying? I mean, structural imbalance means more expenditure than revenue, right?
Right.
And you get that.
Right.
So either the expenditures have to come down, or the revenue has to come up, or a combination of both. Explain which is coming up, what's changing, and how.
I think it's going to be both. I think revenue
How?
needs to come up through economic development and increasing our tax base here in the city. So I think that's an absolute possibility. In the short term, there will be some negotiations that need to be done. We're going to start from scratch with the negotiations, and I think the fire department is a great example of how that can be accomplished. But it's going to take rebuilding the trust.
Negotiations that need to be done suggests cuts.
Concessions, right? Well, they were willing to make concessions in the budget or the proposal.
Okay.
They were willing to do that initially. Now we're going to start from scratch, and again, those have to be addressed and negotiated.
Rodney?
Well, it's going to come from both sides. But, I mean, if you look at accumulated leave payouts, the city made some adjustments to that last year and put a cap on how much leave workers can accumulate. I think that was a good move. But we still haven't been able to get a lot of our workers underneath the cap. And that's something we're going to have to push to make happen. That's just a small step. Trust me, I get that. But that's something that would help. We're going to have to look to put more money into the unfunded portion of CalPERS. CalPERS is no doubt the largest unfunded portions that we have. And we're going to have to prioritize that higher to be able to put more money into that unfunded portion. Now, that means something else is going to have to give. I get that. We're going to have some serious discussions as to where that money is going to come from. I'm going to be honest. I don't have anything pegged where we're going to X this out so that we can give more money to this unfunded portion of CalPERS. But that's a discussion that's going to have to be had. And the priority to put that money toward the unfunded portion is going to happen. Now, with that being said, I do believe that on the revenue side, we can make some adjustments with economic development, with the economy. It's slowly turning, but it is turning. And we are going to have an opportunity, I believe, to bring in more tax revenue to help us take more steps in that direction to shore up our financial situation. But those are just some of my thoughts on how to address the issue.
Sarah?
Sure. So we have to look at what's contributing to that deficit. There are structural decisions, things like having the retirement age so low, healthcare costs, which I'll get back to in a minute.
Having the retirement age so low.
Yeah, 50
So
or
what
50.
can you do about that?
We start to creep it up.
How do you creep it up?
So I'm not going to make an across the board decision without discussing it with the people who would be affected by it. But just from the outside looking in, it looks like anywhere from 6 months to a year that starts, that age line starts moving up each
Okay,
year.
so here's the thing I don't understand.
Sure.
With your existing employees, if you want to start creeping that up, you'll be in court for the next 15 years on a vested rights fight. On the other employees, the post-PEPRA employees, they have a new structure. Are you suggesting a lower pension structure for them?
I know the difficulties of split, of dual tier systems.
Well, you already
and so on,
have
so.
dual tier
Yeah.
system.
So what I'm really trying to get at is that it is really clear that there's a problem. It is really clear that there's no magic answer, right? It has to come from cuts. It has to come from structural changes. Do I know all of what those answers are or what all of those possibilities are? No, I don't have that job yet. But what I do know is that we are not the only city in the world that has this problem. So it is time that we stop fighting with each other about it and be able to have a process where we say, all right, we acknowledge that the taxpayers cannot continue to face unfunded liabilities. So how much of that can be refinanced? How much of that has to be changed structurally? And then we do things like we pull together all of the cities and all of labor and address the issue of why is healthcare cost going up 2 to 3 times the rate of inflation. I believe that there is something we can do to that because I don't think it's based on anything other than us saying we're allowing that to happen every year. It is time we stop allowing that to happen.
I'm going to bring you back just to the
Sure.
pension thing for just a second, for just 1 second.
Sure.
You're not going to creep up the retirement age.
Okay.
Let me put it this way: the only place, unless you want to be the landmark case that goes up to the state Supreme Court years from now, and I don't think you guys probably have the money to do that.
Probably not the way we want to resolve our deficit by spending that. Yeah.
That is not an option. And for the post-PEPRA, you are not going to. You're not going to make enough of a difference in the next 20 years to see any change.
I appreciate the information because obviously I don't have all of
Rocky?
the answers yet.
Sure. I think one of my bigger problems, and I didn't discuss this earlier with the imposition, was 17% out of every group. Because to ask, we have a progressive taxation system because those who are on the higher end can pay and afford to pay. Those on the lower end, it hits harder. So I think that was my biggest problem with 17% on everybody, was that the lowest paid folks have to pay the same percent. It hits them harder. Those are folks
Would you have hit the higher end even harder?
I think the 17, I would have to look at the numbers on how that all worked out.
Well, wait a minute. You're a policy guy. You're a smart guy.
Sure.
You have a policy background. 17%. If you reduce it for some
someone
groups
else, you have to raise
to
it
get
on
the
someone
same
else.
amount of money,
Okay.
you have to increase it with other groups. Okay.
I think those
or
should have
you
been
have
part
a
of the-
bigger deficit. So
Okay, I think
what
that
are
should
you
have been
saying?
part of the negotiations, yes.
So you would have increased it higher on other groups.
I would have
keep
wanted
it-
to negotiate for a higher.
Okay,
cut.
so just to be clear, correct me if I'm misunderstanding what the likely salary structure is between the unions, but I suspect your police and firefighters are higher paid on average than your SEIU folks.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have to have a lower SEIU. You have asked police and firefighter to take larger cuts.
If we absolutely had to make those decisions, I would have wanted to have that be part of the negotiations, yes.
Okay, so what would that have done to your competitive position with police and firefighters?
I think you see a lot of, would have presented a challenge, but I think the other part of this is getting more revenues in and actually going to the voters like we did with Measure A. We're doing it again with Measure C, because I think whenever we make the case to people in Hayward that, hey, these are the folks that are actually going to be affected, we can get more revenues in, and I think that has worked in the past. I think we're doing that right
well,
now.
correct me if I'm wrong, but the upcoming ballot measure is primarily supposed to go for some very specific capital projects.
There is
Primarily.
Some of it's for capital, but some of it's for
For
services
the
and
most
so
part,
forth.
though,
Okay, yeah.
there's not a lot of general fund help in there, if I'm correct, right? At
I mean,
least
it
that's
goes to
the
the general
promise.
fund. It goes to the general
Right,
fund, and then
but-
but it's going to be our job to make sure that it goes to the things we told the voters that would pay for.
That they were essentially
Absolutely.
promised, right?
Absolutely.
So that's not really a way out, right? For
But-
this dilemma, right?
But police and fire are a part of this. That's what we're telling the voters. That's part of what's in there.
Well, I
Am I
believe
wrong?
it's for the fire stations, if I'm remembering correctly.
Fire station number 7.
Part of it.
For-
Yeah.
Okay, it's not for salaries and benefits, do I remember correctly?
There's some operational.
There's some operational.
Yeah.
Because it does go to the general fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so but let me get to the
Okay,
meat of
I'm
what
sorry.
I wanted to say.
Okay.
I want to put that out there, but I think there's a couple of things on the revenue side that we need to be doing. It's a big reason about, and what I'm talking about is economic growth through making sure, and I think a lot of good forward-looking cities are creating these startup type environments where you have you take the schools, and we have great educational institutions, get some of those people in gathering spots, whether it's bars, restaurants, a new library perhaps. And really give them the tools and connect them with people that have the capital to invest and grow some of these jobs of the future. And I think you see a lot of cities that are taking this approach to their downtowns. And I think we have a great opportunity both in the downtown and at South Hayward BART. I think it also requires more housing in those areas. And because of Senate Bill 375, we've identified priority development areas where we can do this growth and make sure that we can do it in an effective way. And we've chosen to make some of these areas really key to the future, and I think Hayward has 3 big ones that we have this opportunity to grow more revenue. I think also the state is going to give us, and I know I'm hopeful on this, but more economic development tools to replace redevelopment, especially in areas. The governor's made proposals, the legislature's made proposals. I'm hopeful that we're going to reach some of those so we can not just come up with these plans, but go to the voters with them and say, hey, we'd like to do this. And I think that's going to have a receptive, it's going to find a good reception in Hayward. I think in addition to that, on the expenditure side, we need to take a more smart data approach to the way that we do a lot of our budget, whether it's how our transportation operates. And I think we're starting to gather data on things like the loop and traffic patterns so we can better plan those things out. Also make sure that we're using some of the mini devices and technologies.
But those, I agree with
To
you on
save-
that.
to
Those-
s-
I guess what I'm saying is that those don't really move the needle, right? In terms of the magnitude of what we're talking about, right?
I think I have a couple more, but I think
honestly,
in
right?
terms of the energy use, water use, supply use, and so forth, I think it does start to chip away at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you combine those things along with honest negotiations with labor about our long-term costs, and certainly I've been on some of the more challenging sides of that with AC Transit. I thought, nobody paid into their pension at AC Transit, so I introduced some principles to move forward with, and it was after that I got on the board, but I started the discussion. Let's go and since nobody pays in, we have to start with our management and say, all right, we need to start getting a percentage from you, and so we enacted a second tier for management unrepresented employees because I didn't think it was fair to go to workers and say we need money from you when the guys who are making the most weren't paying in themselves. And I think we started that I was very proud to start that process. And I also said, hey, whenever times are good, we don't go and bump up pensions more because we know that there's long-term costs to this. And I said in the memos that we get from the retirement board, it needs to be more clear.
Okay, but here,
Okay.
How does that apply here?
Okay, because I think what I'm trying to tell you is I really do understand the pension challenges because I remember seeing how much of a percentage it cut into monies that would be going towards bus service and said we've got to start really taking this
Okay,
seriously.
so you understand the pension challenge, but what's your solution to the pension challenge?
I think we have to have those honest negotiations with labor and have good talks and say, okay, what are some good ideas on either cutting our costs or making these investments, and when can we make those investments in the long-term liabilities? Because if it's not now, then when is it going to be, and how do we get to those challenges?
Can you be specific on that?
I think I think that you do have to sit down with people, look at those numbers, say, okay, why are these numbers not accurate? It can't just be that they're 10-year projections. Yeah, let's try to grow our revenues, try to
No, I was just
improve
asking
things, but
specific.
also
You raised the pension, so I
Sure.
mean, Sarah put something on the table and I shot it down.
okay.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand what you're going to put on the table.
And it wasn't the only thing I was putting
Right?
on
No,
the
no,
table.
I understand, and I no disrespect intended at
Sure.
all. I'm trying to evaluate what's reality from fantasy here. That's all. In terms of okay, if you've got a solution to the pension problem, I really want to hear it. So I guess what I'm saying.
Well, I think on one side, I think it's important that a lot of people worried about pensions because we don't have a real retirement solution in this country. We have Social Security that only kind
I
of.
get all that. I mean,
I get that. I get
I'm a
that.
believer in defined benefit plans.
Sure.
You're talking to one of the biggest believers in defined benefit plans. That said, that doesn't help you with the problem you're in right now. So if you've got a pension solution, I mean, and I'm only pressing you because you put yourself forward just a second ago as really up on pensions. So how does that play into helping Hayward? I mean, that's all I'm asking,
Okay, I know it's not enough just to
You know,
say that I
because
understand the problem,
Yeah.
but I really do want to have
Okay.
those honest discussions
Okay.
with our bargaining units, and I really feel like I'm qualified to do that and say, hey, look, we're going to be cutting into services. We don't want to cut into services or have to lay off employees, so what's the solution here? And if it's not going to be this year, then when are we really going to start to handle this? Because I know that it's going to start cutting into services in ways that we don't want to do that. And so I think you combine all those things with making sure we're bringing in more revenue, but also, hey, let's be honest on the expense side. This can't keep going forever, and I don't want to leave. Should I get elected? I don't want to leave and have this huge burden on the table. And so I don't want to. I can't say that I have a greater solution than that at the time, but I think once people realize how good a deal a defined benefit pension is, yeah, they're going to want to see that through because the guys behind them are going to want it too, and hopefully in the
Guys behind them
meantime,
aren't going to get it.
well, yeah, and that's the issue, right? And I hope in the meantime we can take a serious approach to retirement, not just here in Hayward, but in California. I think we are starting to with the Secure Choice Retirement program that the state's starting to introduce, so that more people have some type of defined benefit in addition to Social Security. And I think you start to add those things up, and the long-term anxiety start to go down. And maybe you do go to the voters to talk about these types of things. And I think if people had more money or had their own retirement system that was going to be shored up, maybe we could talk about how we share this among everybody for the people that have been working for the city and providing services.
We'll have this discussion offline.
Sounds good.
Marvin?
With all the conversation I got kind of sidetracked on all these different things. So I believe your question was about the imposition.
My question started out about the imposition, but I kind of reframed it because it was obviously got a little confused back here. And so the way I sort of reframed it, as I recall, was essentially, what are the long-term solutions? How do you bring that structural deficit, long-term structural deficit, how do you close that over
Okay.
time?
I was a budget analyst at the county for many years. And the one thing I learned is that generally a combination of revenue enhancements combined with cost cuts are the most sensible way to address budget deficits. But let's be realistic here. I hear some of these proposals, and it's basically about easy stuff. Now, do you think that the city manager, MBA, assistant city manager, or finance director, do you think we haven't thought about consolidation, that we haven't thought about printing on two sides of the paper or going paperless? All the easy stuff has been done. Mergers with departments. And now it's time to address the big, tough issues, the issues that get you booed at meetings. 80% of that general fund, $24.6 million, $124.6 million, is driven by employee salaries and benefits. You cannot address this issue without recognizing that and without taking the courageous decisions you need to reduce those costs. Those costs, as I mentioned at least twice before, are driven, in my view, by two things: pensions, escalating OPEB, retiree medical coverage, and they have to come into the cost-cutting measures along with revenue enhancements like the reauthorization of the UUT, which is coming up in 2018. That's $15 million a year it's bringing in. Measure C will bring in $10 million a year, and it will provide for some operational costs. But you have to, these decisions have to incorporate the serious cost-cutting measures that face us. And I tell you, I get a kick out of some of these people that want the raises, don't want to pay into the pensions, see all this long-term debt being accumulated. I'm sure they've got kids, they've got grandkids. Do they want to kick the can down the road to them? Maybe they feel that they're going to take care of their kids. It is absolutely selfish to kick this can down the road so that the people living now can enjoy the lifestyle that they want.
Folks, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it.
I think you've given us a lot to think about too.
You guys have some real challenges.
That's what we do.
It's your accrued liability is $900 million. Your market value of assets are $536 million. That is on the 3 pensions and your OPEB. You've got an unfunded liability of $372 million. You're 59% funded. Your annual cover payroll is $74 million. So that unfunded liability represents 5 years of cover payroll. That is a real problem.
It is a real problem.
I don't know how you get there unless you get concessions on these points, and I don't know how you get there until people start understanding the long-term consequences of it, because within a few years, within 4, I believe it is, you run out of money. You literally run out of money. We can talk about the 10-year long-term structural deficit, but in 4 years, you run out of money.
And that's the conversation we need to be
And
having.
you can't be waiting to have that conversation. From our perspective, to the 5 of you, they couldn't afford to wait any longer. They just, because that cliff is rapidly approaching. And yeah, it was painful, but there was a little sign it was going to get any better. Those are tough cuts, but the alternative was more jobs lost. So the alternative was more jobs lost. And if you believe otherwise, you show me how the math works, okay?
Yeah.
I mean,
I know. There's some assumptions in that.
Show me
place that
you
I've-
show me the math,
Mhm.
because I'm a numbers guy. And if you
Right.
want to show me the math, I'm happy to look at it.
Sure.
But I don't think the city